Hello and welcome to Number by Color. My name is Todd, and I just finished playing through Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, my first PlayStation 5 game that is not Astro's Playroom. Yes, I know Miles Morales is a cross-gen game and you can play it on the PlayStation 4, but out of all the first-party games, Demon's Souls is the only one that is truly built for the PlayStation 5, and I am not yet ready for that kind of pain. Regardless, Miles Morales is an excellent choice for your new console, and it's highly unlikely that you'll be disappointed by choosing to play it. In November of 2020, Insomniac Games, now a first-party PlayStation studio, released Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, the follow-up to their 2018 critical success, Marvel's Spider-Man. Don't let it confuse you though, Miles Morales is more akin to Uncharted: The Lost Legacy or Infamous First Light than it is to the game that came before it. However, in this case, it's more of a bridge between the first Spider-Man game and the inevitable sequel, even though this game does have a fully self-contained story. Miles Morales, the game, picks up shortly after we left these characters in 2018, with Miles having been bitten by a spider and discovering he is now more like Peter Parker than he thought. Peter has been training Miles Morales, the person, in the ways of being a Spider-Man, and our story picks up right before Pete takes a trip to Symkaria with Mary Jane, leaving Miles to protect the city on his own. As simple as it seems, this is a believable enough premise to get Miles by himself, and, in my opinion, it was a good idea to leave Pete out of the main story so that we were able to focus solely on Miles and not worry about focusing attention on two Spider-Men. In a way, this game is Miles' origin story as Spider-Man, or at least his first real conflict in the role. Having to share that first conflict with a more experienced mentor might have reduced the impact of the events, and it would have also taken valuable experience away from Miles. This is his trial by fire. A lot of the time, the decisions he has to make don't work out the way he thinks they will. He has to think on his feet and learn as he goes, and he is ultimately much stronger for it. The story itself isn't quite as strong as the first game, but I attribute that more to the condensed nature of the game rather than the particular events that unfold. The game centers around Miles, his mom Rio, his friends Genki and Finn, and the Roxxon Corporation and their supposed clean energy source, Nuform. Roxxon seems to be up to some shady business, and suddenly a new vigilante group, the Underground, is starting to cause trouble in the city. I don't want to give away too much of the specifics due to the shortness and all, but what I will say is that while the story itself may not be as exciting and dramatic as the first game, the characters are the glue that hold it all together, and they greatly elevate the experience. The voice actors do an amazing job bringing these characters to life, and their expert performances made every interaction the characters have with each other so believable and real. I would even say that this game is less about the story and more about the characters, because there were several occasions where I got choked up, and that's definitely thanks to how the characters were being affected by what was happening around them. It's nice to see that character growth wasn't sacrificed here. Another area where sacrifices weren't made was in the gameplay. This game sports some much appreciated updates to the first game's combat and mission structure, and it feels just as exhilarating to swing through the city and jump off skyscrapers. I'd say the only thing that still needs work is when you're walking on the ground. Miles can still run and do parkour over obstructions, but it always feels like movement grinds to a halt when you're not swinging. But of course, you'll spend most of the game in the air anyway, so it's not a huge issue. The main mission structure is similar to the first game, but the one thing that elevates it in this game is the mobile app that Miles' friend Genki makes for him. A little app called Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man. This is a clever and believable way of giving players side missions to complete at any time. Just open up the app to see if any crimes have been reported or if anybody needs help solving a problem. You no longer have to aimlessly swing around waiting for something to happen. Now you can initiate it all yourself, and this makes the game so much more enjoyable to play. Not only that, it adds a deeper level of immersion. But starting missions whenever you want is really only convenient if the missions are actually interesting. In the first game, there were a wide variety of side activities to partake in, and they weren't all winners. Fortunately, the activities in Miles Morales are better on average, mostly because there are far fewer of them, though there are still a handful that teeter on being more frustrating than fun, mainly just a few of the Peter Parker challenges. Otherwise though, you'll be taking down hideouts in underground labs, searching for collectibles, and tracking down pigeons. Again. Speaking of challenges, I found combat in this game to have a pretty even difficulty balance. It's not overly easy or hard, and some encounters will require quick thinking. However, because this game is fairly short in comparison to the first, there is somewhat a lack of diversity in the kinds of combat challenges you'll face. That doesn't really hinder the experience though, because Miles learns new skills at an even enough pace to make combat always feel interesting. You may recall that Peter had a wide variety of gadgets at his disposal in the first game because of his inventive nature. Miles doesn't have quite as many to use this time around. In fact, there are only 4, including the standard web shooter. Instead, Miles gains new abilities in the form of so-called Venom powers. These are special attacks that use bioelectric energy and allow Miles to deal heavy damage to groups of enemies. There are several different Venom attacks that Miles can learn, and they each feel unique enough to be useful, which is nice, because it can be a bit disappointing to be given abilities that don't seem worth adding to your arsenal. I will say though, that naming this bioelectrical power Venom is confusing, and I'm wondering how that will work when the character Venom, who was hinted at in the first game, is introduced. Miles is a relatively new addition to the Spider-Verse too, so I wonder what the thought process was behind that naming convention. Either way, Venom power is really fun to use, and it'll be interesting to see what Insomniac does to refine Peter's combat in Spider-Man 2, now that we've grown accustomed to using more than just a variety of gadgets. At the end of the day though, combat in this game is pretty similar to the first game. Even though you have a few new abilities, you'll still be punching, kicking, and swinging into enemies while pulling over or throwing environmental objects, sticking bad guys to the walls, or sneaking around to perform stealth takedowns. It's definitely more kinetic and refined here, but the general ideas are the same. One of the things being touted by the PlayStation 5 versus the PlayStation 4 is that games can now make use of ray tracing. Miles Morales offers players 3 graphical settings: Performance Mode, Performance RT Mode, and Fidelity Mode. The 2 performance modes offer a lowered resolution in order to achieve 60 frames per second, and the Fidelity Mode has a locked 30 frames per second with additional visual effects, ray tracing, and more densely populated streets. I'll be honest, I'm not really the kind of person who cares one way or the other when it comes to this, and I don't really like being given a choice between these kinds of options, but I have to say that Fidelity Mode is definitely the way to play this game. The visuals here are just too good to sacrifice for 60 FPS. Granted, I find 60 FPS to be a bit too much, at least for this game, but the textures and colors really shine in Fidelity Mode. Character faces and animations are excellent, and I was especially impressed by the clothing of all things. There are times when Miles is wearing just a regular hoodie, and all the different textures you'd normally take for granted were super clear. I'm sure me saying that won't age well as this console generation goes on, but I was very impressed here. This game also has a lot of alternate suits that can be unlocked, just like the first game, and some of them are legitimately awesome. I often had a hard time choosing which one I wanted to use because I liked so many of them. The music and sound design of the first Spider-Man game were really well done, from the sounds the web shooters made as you swung through the city, to the dynamic crescendo of the music as you soared above the rooftops. Miles Morales shares those qualities, and this time, the music has more hip-hop and trap influences. It works really well to provide a new take on familiar musical themes and give the audio a more urban feel. I probably prefer the more strictly orchestral version of the main theme, but I did still find myself swinging through the city just to hear the music playing. I also loved the return of J. Jonah Jameson's podcast called Just the Facts, as well as the new Danica Hart podcast, The Danicast. These provide great comic relief, not to mention shedding a light on the differing opinions people have when it comes to our Spider-Man. I believe the first game only had Just the Facts, so it's nice to have more of a balanced perspective here. We all know by now that I love trophies, but how are they in Miles Morales? The bad news is that there's a trophy for finishing a New Game Plus playthrough, so you'll have to play this game twice to get the Platinum Trophy. On the bright side, there are no difficulty-related trophies, and the game is relatively short, so a second playthrough shouldn't take you very long at all. Not to mention that the game is a ton of fun anyway, and New Game Plus offers additional suits and abilities to unlock, so you'll still get that sense of progression, which helps keep things interesting. Apart from that, the trophies here are similar to the first game. Collect the collectibles, unlock the upgrades, clear the side missions, etc., etc. Nothing is overly complicated, so you should have no problem unlocking almost every trophy without having to grind. There are a few that require performing certain kinds of attacks a specific number of times, so I recommend taking advantage of Miles' full skill set on a regular basis. Overall, this trophy list hits the sweet spot between respecting your time while still making you put in a little effort. Peter Parker's Spider-Man is my favorite superhero, so I wasn't quite sure what to expect playing a Spider-Man game where Peter takes a back seat. Fortunately for me, Miles is such an endearing character that I really had nothing to worry about. His personal struggles are relatable, and being a musician myself, I really enjoyed the fact that he's into music production. I still prefer Peter, but I'm glad Miles is part of this world, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the two Spider-Men work together in future games. This year has been extremely unnormal, and the last few months have been especially strange for me. After my first playthrough, I wasn't sure how I felt about the story of this game, because my headspace was so skewed. In a way, I'm glad the trophy list made me play through the game a second time because I was able to focus more intently without getting distracted, and it really showed me what a good game it is. I think the tropes are more apparent here than the first game, and the storyline overall isn't quite as strong either, but the character interactions are so good and believable that it really doesn't matter if the storyline struggles at times. It just goes to show that character is more important than plot, and I'll take that over giant set pieces with no heart any day. This game is great, and if you're a fan of action games, regardless of how you feel about superheroes, I think it's definitely worth your time. That's all for me for today, but man, I'm feeling good about the PlayStation 5. This is one of the first games I played, and if this is the quality we're starting with, I am really excited about where we're going to end up in the next couple years. But for now, my winter backlog is calling me, and Santa said he won't bring me any new games if I don't finish the ones I've already got, so I guess I need to get to work. Make sure you like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more, and until next time, just remember, be greater, be yourself.